It happened without warning. One moment, the cliff was there. The next, it was gone. A massive section of rock, hundreds of feet tall, broke away from the canyon wall and collapsed into the gorge below. Rangers heard it from miles away. The sound was described as a long, deep crack, followed by silence. But it wasn't the collapse that shocked everyone. It was what the collapse revealed. Something had been sealed inside that rock for longer than anyone could calculate. And the moment it was exposed to open air, the questions started. Questions that geologists, historians, and federal researchers would spend months trying to answer. Because what was hidden inside that canyon wall wasn't supposed to be there. If you're into real, unexplained discoveries that actually happened, subscribe to the channel. The Grand Canyon sees millions of visitors every year, but on that Tuesday morning in early October, it was nearly empty. A small team of park rangers was conducting a routine trail inspection along the south rim. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Just another quiet morning in one of the most familiar landscapes on Earth. Then, the ground shook. Not violently, more like a low, slow rumble beneath their boots. One of the rangers stopped walking. He looked toward the canyon edge and watched an entire section of cliff face, roughly 200 feet wide, peel away from the wall and drop. Just drop. The sound hit seconds later, a deep, hollow crash that echoed through the gorge for almost a full minute. Dust rose in a thick cloud below. When it finally settled, there was a gap in the canyon wall where solid rock had stood for centuries. The rangers radioed it in immediately. A geological event, possibly significant. Authorities would need to assess the site. Standard procedure. But when a survey team rappelled down to document the collapse site the following morning, one of the geologists stopped mid-descent. He radioed up to his team leader. His voice was calm, but his words weren't. He said there was something in the exposed rock face. Not a crack, not a fault line, a cavity, a large sealed chamber, now cracked open, running deep into the interior of the canyon wall. Nobody knew it was there. No survey had ever detected it. And, based on the sediment layering around the opening, it had been sealed shut for an extraordinarily long time. The question was, what was inside? By the next morning, the site was no longer a ranger operation. 3 federal vehicles were parked at the trailhead before sunrise. A geological survey crew, 2 specialists from the National Park Service, and a consultant from the United States Geological Survey had all been called in overnight. Nobody explained why it escalated that fast. They just showed up. The lead geologist, a veteran researcher named Dr. Harlan Cole, was the first to enter the cavity with proper lighting equipment. He was inside for 11 minutes. When he came back out, he didn't say anything immediately. He just stood at the entrance, looking at his notes. His assistant asked him what was in there. Dr. Cole looked up slowly. He said, "It's not natural. The chamber walls were too uniform. Natural erosion carves irregular shapes. Uneven, random, unpredictable. But this cavity had walls that curved at almost consistent angles. Sections of the interior showed layering patterns inconsistent with the surrounding sandstone formation, as if something had once occupied the space, and the rock had slowly formed around it. Over thousands of years, the team brought in ground-penetrating radar equipment the same afternoon. They mapped the full interior, and that's when the second shock hit. The chamber wasn't just large. It extended further back into the canyon wall than anyone expected, nearly 40 feet deep, and at the very back of the cavity, the radar detected something solid, something with a shape that didn't match the rock around it, something that was not geological. The trail was closed by 6 a.m. the following day. No announcement, no explanation given to the public. Just orange barriers and a federal vehicle blocking the access point. Hikers who showed up that morning were turned away and told there had been a geological hazard assessment. But the rangers at the gate weren't talking, and the researchers inside the canyon weren't coming out. By midday, a second team arrived. This one was different. No Park Service logos, no USGS patches. Just plain gear and hard cases being carried down the trail in silence. One of the original survey rangers, a man named Travis Webb who had been at the site since day one, later told colleagues something that stopped them cold. He said the new team brought equipment he had never seen on a canyon survey before. Preservation tools. The kind used for fragile, ancient materials. The kind used when you're afraid that exposure to open air might damage what you've found. That detail changed everything, because geological formations don't need preservation equipment. Rocks don't deteriorate in hours, but organic materials do. Certain compounds do. Certain objects do. Webb said the atmosphere inside the team shifted the moment that equipment came down the trail. The conversation stopped. Everyone just worked. Then, late that afternoon, one of the researchers emerged from the cavity and walked directly to Dr. Cole. He handed him a photograph taken from deep inside the chamber. Dr. Cole studied it for a long moment. Then, he took out his radio and requested that the entire southern access corridor of that canyon section be shut down immediately. Not assessed, not monitored, shut down. The official report was released quietly. No press conference, no headlines pushed by the Park Service. Just a published document buried in a federal geological database. But researchers found it. And when the details started spreading, the reaction was immediate. What was inside that chamber wasn't a modern object. It wasn't equipment. It wasn't debris. It was a collection of preserved wooden structures and carved stone tools. Tightly packed, deliberately arranged, sealed inside that cavity for an estimated 3,000 years. The chamber wasn't formed around the objects by accident. It had been constructed, carefully, intentionally. Ancient ancestral Puebloan people, who inhabited the canyon region long before recorded history, had carved that space into the rock face themselves, then sealed it from the outside, layer by layer, over generations. But here was the part that silenced the room when researchers read it. The objects inside weren't random. They were organized in a pattern consistent with ceremonial storage. Items placed with clear intention, preserved not by accident, but by extraordinary geological coincidence. The collapse that everyone initially called a disaster had actually protected the chamber for centuries longer than the original seal could have held on its own. The rock that fell away that Tuesday morning, it had been acting as an additional barrier, unknowingly, naturally, for over 1,000 years. The canyon itself had been guarding it, and if that cliff face had never collapsed, no modern instrument would have ever detected what was hidden inside. It would have stayed sealed forever. The artifacts were carefully extracted over a period of 6 weeks. Every object documented, every inch of the chamber photographed and mapped. The site was then sealed again, this time by federal preservation order. No public access, no tourism, no exceptions. But the story had already gotten out. Archaeologists from 3 universities requested access to the published findings within them days. Indigenous tribal representatives from the Hopi and Zuni nations, descendants of the ancestral Puebloan people, were formally notified, and their response wasn't what most people expected. They weren't surprised. Tribal elders said their oral histories had long referenced sacred storage sites built into canyon walls, places deliberately hidden, places meant to survive long after the people who built them were gone. They had always believed those places existed. They just didn't know where. One elder, speaking through a tribal spokesperson, said something that stayed with the research team long after the report was filed. He said their ancestors didn't hide those objects out of fear. They hid them out of trust. Trust that one day the canyon would decide to show them. Dr. Cole, the lead geologist, was asked in a later interview what the discovery meant scientifically. He paused for a long moment before answering. He said the most humbling part wasn't what they found. It was realizing how much is still out there, still sealed, still waiting, hidden inside walls we walk past every single day. Because sometimes the earth doesn't lose things. Sometimes it just holds on to them until the right moment. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel Every week, another real discovery.